Thrills and chills. Okay, we're back, we're live, we're doing something new today. It's called Think Tech Tutorial. And the idea is we want to have our host tell about their lessons and how, another host would be, better off to do it this way or that way. We try to educate our hosts, and we also want to let people in, let the world in to see how sausage is made here at ThinkTech. Maybe that's the title, How Sausage is Made here at ThinkTech.
Maybe tofu sausage for me, please.
Okay, that's Reg Baker. He's the host of Business in Hawaii, and Justine Espiritu, she's the host of Hawaii Food and Farming, and before that of the TEDx show. So she's got experience and he's got experience. We're going to draw on their experience, and we're going to go beyond, way beyond what is in the website, because in the website we have the host guide, we have the guest guide, we have tips on Skype, we have all this stuff that a prospective host can look at, or the public can look at for that matter. But let's talk about your experience and see what we can learn by it, and how sausage is made. Tips and tricks, thrills and chills, okay? In doing ThinkTech right here at home. Okay, let's start with getting guests, preparing guests, which is an onerous obligation sometimes. Justine, how do you do that? What's the best way?
Yeah, I like to start it off with kind of downplaying it a little bit. Just say it's really fun. We're just going to have a conversation. I like to emphasize, we want to feature you. You're interesting, you're doing awesome work, and we want to use this opportunity to get your background story and really just use this as a forum to feature what they're doing. So just try to get them excited as an opportunity to kind of promote their work, and then just really play up that it's very casual and fun. Yeah.
Telephone or email?
I think I start first with a phone call. I think I can kind of sweet talk them a little bit, and then I email them with the whole page of logistics.
Yeah. And how do you commit them? How do you make, reasonably certain they are going to be where they're supposed to be at the time and place?
Yeah, that's where it needs documentation, email, where can you meet us at this time, at this place, and verbal confirmation. So I send them the logistics, here's all the information, and then get them to verbally commit to it. Yeah. But even then, I've had trouble with, we've wanted to plan a lot in advance. So, I went a month in advance.
Did you?
We tried to. We tried to start that out of scheduling a month in advance, but then we realized, no, they agreed to it in a month in advance. Then when I tried to follow up with them the week of, they were didn't put it on the calendar. Have something else going on.
That's a very sophisticated lesson,
Yeah.
If you go too far out, then they forget. Then you lose them. So how far out should you go?
I think now I realize 2 weeks is probably good.
Yeah, I think that's
2 weeks in advance. Yeah, you can't do 2 last minute, although sometimes that magically works. If you're hey, we need someone today, can you come in? Work today.
That's harder, isn't it?
It is. But 2 weeks, I think is good.
You had one today. You got him on a couple hours notice. That was really remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah, good work.
Yeah.
So what about that, Reg, do you agree with?
First of all, since she's sitting right next to me, I'm going to agree with all of it.
Fair enough.
But I work a little bit differently. We're booked out until May.
Really?
We've got guests already all signed up. They're all committed. They've followed with the emails. I've already given an outline of what we're going to be talking about. There's a basic structure to the program that they understand. And the way I bribe them or entice them is that I buy them lunch at the Plaza Club every day, because our show is from 2 to 3. And I invite them to lunch at 12:30.
Perfect.
And so they come down, I validate the parking, and then they come on the show. We talk about the show about an hour prior to. We talk again about the structure, the theme, how it's going to work. I give an idea of the studio, what it looks like, and we talk about some of the questions that we'll be going over. But I try not to script it very much. I want it to be free-flowing. But I find it very easy to get them to talk about themselves and their businesses. And that's the theme of the show is, who are you? Where did you come from? How did you get to where you're at? And why are you so successful? And so they generally don't have a problem talking about that.
Well, I think in that sense, you have a little easier of a sell. You're working with business folks that's really their thing. With my experience working with farmers or people that are more behind the scenes of the food system, they're kind of more reluctant to put themselves out there. They're really not comfortable in this kind of setting, maybe haven't
green.
interviewed before. It is green, yeah, that's true. But I mean, I'm all about laying out talking points because, yeah, at least, we break up the segments, let them know it's a three 15-minute segments, and instead of very thoroughly, I just at least try to have like 10 questions or like list 10 topics, because I am worried about it being too scripted, and I just like to say, it's going to be a conversation, here's like 10 topics we're going to hit.
You need to leave some time open to kind of go off on this direction or that direction. If it's something that's really starting to click and sounds interesting and the audience would probably enjoy it, then we don't want to just cut that off because it's not part of the question, so
Right.
having the flexibility to do that. But I think one of the reasons why I'm able to book out so far out in the future is because I'm very involved with the Chamber of Commerce, several chambers. I'm very involved with the Small Business Administration. I'm constantly out there meeting with people all the time, and I'm constantly promoting the show. And so
We like that.
I get people calling me up, emailing me, asking me to be on the show, and that's where I
awesome.
start, kind of, okay, but, and what's funny is it's a marketing ploy. I say, yeah, but, I don't have any openings until 2 months from now. And they go, oh, well, sign me up right away. So it works out pretty well.
A little reverse psychology,
Well, supply and demand.
What are the parameters you use to select the guest in the first place? I mean, is there a some sort of metric or some sort of requirement that you have in your head to pick the guest? Is there anybody you wouldn't pick and that you would exclude from this?
I would not talk about Egypt and the Nile on my show.
Yeah, okay, I think I got that. She's only saying that because I sent her an article about the Nile and how they were losing water to Ethiopia or Somalia.
Right. Well, it's like we have a theme show, so that kind of sets the parameters, and maybe didn't have a guest lined up. So Jay's just like, can you just talk about this? And it's like, no, I don't want to talk about that.
I've got a pretty broad comfort zone here, but that's a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
But I want, again, the theme I'm looking for on my show is to find successful business people, because we've heard so many negativity. We've heard so much, this is a worse state for a variety of reasons to do business. Well, we have people that are dealing with that, and they are still successful, and there are ways to make that happen. So I'm looking for people that have that kind of story. But I don't want it to get too boring, so I mix it up a little bit with different industries, different personality types, old guys, young guys, male, female, and just kind of keep it varied enough to keep it interesting.
Would you invite a guest back? And if so, at what frequency? At what interval? If at all?
I would maybe if it was an emergency. and
Which sometimes happens.
Yeah. But I would try not to do that. I mean, I feel like the field is so vast with like interesting and eligible people that I would be reluctant to do that unless it was urgent.
Yeah, if there was a good reason to. I mean, I don't have them on the calendar to come back, but in a situation where I lost a speaker for some reason, then there might be somebody who's already familiar with the show. They know what's going on, and they have something that's a relevant update to what they've already,
Does news, current news play a role in your selection of guests? In other words, if he's on the front page and you know him, you can get to him, or her, you can bring him in that day, is that a factor in your choice?
I kind of go the opposite route. I think especially with our kind of theme and trying to feature farmers, I kind of look for the folks that are the behind the scenes folks or that don't have that kind of recognition. Folks that are going to be like, maybe someone doesn't recognize the name and so they're interested. Who is this person? What are they doing? What is their role in the food system? I'd rather like bring that to light necessarily than look at the front page and be like, I should bring this person.
You want to reveal people that we wouldn't otherwise meet.
Yeah.
How about you, Rich?
Well, that's a neat theme, and it's good to get people out there and get that recognition if they got that really good story to tell. But yes, for example, when the marijuana law was passed, medical marijuana, I had a medical marijuana attorney come on and explain the process, and I think we were one of the first in the state that actually had done that. And then, with some of the issues that we've had with data security breaches, particularly with the IRS, I've had people come on and talk about that, and some of the warning signs about, some of the more relevant, timely topics like tax returns and tax identity fraud and stuff like that.
Well, we have a disembodied voice. Actually, she's not disembodied at all. She's our production engineer. She sees all the shows, and guess what? She also listens and watches.
And I love spending time in the control room as your production engineer.
Yeah, so it's really fabulous. So Zuri Bender, of course. So Zuri, have you got any thoughts about this? What a picture, fabulous.
Yeah, I thought I'd pick a nicer picture than how I look today, but you guys are basically saying everything that comes to mind when it comes to shows. The only thing I would add is that, when it comes to bringing people back, you don't always just want to wait until it's just a last minute thing. Sometimes they're so great, you need to continue that conversation. So I just wanted to pop that in there and say that while you guys are having a great conversation. Thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go to another topic now. This is the topic about naming episodes, okay? Because when you go on the calendar and you put your information down and talk about what who this person is and affiliation, you're also naming an episode, and that's a message to all of us to at least arguably use that name for everything we do in terms of publicity and to uploading to YouTube and so forth. So what considerations do you take into account to come to a name, to select, to draft a name? What kind of name you like?
Man, I just try to come up with something weird to play on
Weird.
words. That play on words
weird.
of their business, of their farm name or something they do. Just, I don't know, I think the general theme of my show is pretty like mine and Matt's show. It's kind of like warm and fuzzy. It's nothing like too serious. So I try to not take the title too seriously.
Yeah, good. Well, it's important. But what you're looking to interest people, you're looking to catch them, right? And not necessarily to describe in painstaking detail exactly what's going to be discussed, but just to catch them with something like a newspaper headline, right? You want to catch them. Yeah. And if it's pithy, all the better. What about you, Reg?
Same. I try to do it in a small sound bite as possible, because I end up taking the link that we produce, for YouTube, and I rebroadcast it. I put it on Facebook. I put it on Twitter. I put it on my website. I send it out in email blasts for 400 or 500 people, and I put it on LinkedIn. And so we get exposure of close to 10,000 people, by putting it on there. And I want it to be very short, concise, catchy, to get them interested. And when people do searches on the internet, or a search through LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever, I want it to be something that'll catch their attention. It'll show up on the search results.
Yeah, and if you can hit both, if you can also have someone understand roughly what you're going to talk about, as well as being pithy, that's, I'm reminded of one that we did a couple of weeks ago about box jellyfish. We called it Out of the Box with Box Jellyfish. All right.
That sounds fun, but how many people are going to do a Google search for that?
I don't care. No, because actually the Google searches are based on the description you give. It's that blurb that makes it.
That's what I focus on more.
Yeah, that's the serious discussion of the show. And also the meta tag keywords, which we put in for every show. Suri, what would you add on selecting a title for the episode?
When it comes to selecting a title, you definitely want to be catchy. You do not want to be too wordy. Otherwise, it looks horrible on screen, and it's hard for people to find it. Yeah. And we will also go to a commercial right now, so we can put extra earpieces in for Reg and Justine.
Okay, what a great idea.
Hello, everybody. I'm IC Davidson. Thanks for tuning in to Think Tech Hawaii. One of the things that we do here, or the thing that we do here, is promote civic engagement in Hawaii. What does that mean? We want to talk about things that people want to hear about, and we want you to engage us and be part of that conversation. One of the ways that you can do that is by joining in during our live show via Twitter. How do you do that? Well, you get on the interwebs and get Twitter, get an account, and mention us if you have a question. What you'll do is you tune into our show live, tweet us questions, and our hosts and guests will address them accordingly. It's really easy, it's really fun, and I think that your participation in what we're doing here will help us continue the dialogue on very important issues that we're trying to cover. Sustainability, clean energy, you name it, we're on top of it. We want you to be part of what we're doing because together we'll be able to make things change. Thank you for watching Think Tech Hawaii, thinktechhawaii.com, weekdays 12 to 5 p.m. That was weird.
Aloha, this is Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and I want to thank you for watching Think Tech Hawaii. We are delighted to be partners with Think Tech because it gives us the opportunity to bring to you a show every week on Monday at 2:00 p.m. called Ehana Kako. Ehana Kako means let's work together because we believe that Hawaii will be a better place when everybody works together. And in what way? Well, at the Grassroots Institute, we research 3 basic areas and we invite guests to come on board from across the country, the state, and the nation to talk about a better economy, a better government, a better society. Now, aren't those things we all want? Indeed. If you'd like to have the latest research in terms of public policy, as well as ways in which we can build a better government, economy, and society, then tune in every Monday on Think Tech Hawaii at 2:00 p.m. for our fascinating guests on Ehana Kako. Let's work together. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, and I'll see you then. Aloha.
Aloha, namaskar, and hello. My name is Anu Hittel, and I host the show called Climate Change Beyond Outrage. We go beyond outrage to find solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. I hope you will join me here every Tuesday at 1:00. We broadcast live from thinktechhawaii.com. Aloha and bye-bye.
We're back, we're live, we're here at Think Tech Tutorial, which is a discussion of thrills and chills, tips and tricks for hosts who are on Think Tech Hawaii and for everybody to see inside how the sausage is made. We have Reg Baker, he's the host of Business in Hawaii. Justina Espiritu, she's a co-host in Hawaii Food and Farming. And the disembodied voice you hear is Zuri Bender, our production engineer. That rhymes. Okay. Let's go to co-hosting for a minute, because I think we raised that in the break, and I think it's really interesting. And Justine, you do that every week, and you know, it's really an art form. Tell us how you approach that.
Yeah, I mean, I like co-hosting because it's this at least sense of shared responsibility. And I mean, doing this weekly, booking guests weekly, coming up with questions weekly can kind of seem like a lot. And if you have like a sidekick in it, it's kind of fun. And then if it's like, you can kind of like suffer together. But, and it's interesting. Sometimes it's challenging because if you want to go in different directions, if one co-host is very adamant about laying out talking points and a little bit of a direction, and if co-host number 2 isn't interested in following that, can be a little challenging. Or
So how do you deal with that?
you just go with the flow. I know sometimes, or you know, then you bring the conversation back to it later. I think just not getting hung up on it. And again, since it's kind of just like a casual conversation, you know, topics can bounce back and forth. And I like attacking a topic and a person from 2 different perspectives.
Sure.
And it keeps it interesting.
Do you invite the co-host to ask questions, or do you let the co-host come up with questions, you know, and present them without being invited?
The co-host, well, ideally we would come up with the like talking points ahead of time together.
Okay.
Sometimes one co-host isn't interested in that. So I mean, I'm all about like laying out a rough structure, and then if we're on the show and then he wants to jump in and take it in another direction, that's good. So
I was telling you on Hawaii Public Radio in my formative years on this, they told me you can have hosts and co-hosts, but at the end of the day, you have to have a host. You have to have somebody act as the primary host who ultimately, you know, opens and closes and is responsible for the track of the show.
Yeah.
And I mean the intellectual track of the show. One thing I do, let me throw it at you, is if I have a co-host and the co-host isn't actively presenting questions, I ask the co-host to present questions. And at the end, and I tell him in advance, I ask him if he will please summarize the whole show.
you just put him on the spot.
Well, I tell him I'm going to do this. You know, presumably he's thinking about it through the show, so he's not caught short. But it's very valuable because he takes an important role in the show, right? And you have the benefit of a summary. Makes it easier for you, Reg, what do you think?
Well, I think you guys have more talent than I have. You know, I have a hard enough time trying to get the guests there on time and prepping them and mentoring them and taking care of them and getting them to talk and answer the questions.
Yeah.
If I had another co-host that I had to also work with, I think it'd be awful confusing for me.
So you like kind of having that whole control.
I like having two guests, actually.
Oh, okay.
So that I can actually play one off the other and encourage them to ask some questions and get a real dialogue or trialogue going. And I find that to be a little bit, easier for me to control and direct. And I think it creates a different perspective because we've got two different guests that are on talking, about, their own little businesses and how one complements the other. There's usually a linkage between the two.
Yeah.
And so this one here may be talking about e-commerce. And this one here may be, like today, selling a food truck. And how did e-commerce help the food truck? And so they talk about and they play off each other, and it gets real interesting.
Well, I think it's not easy to have two guests involved in two separate kinds of activities, and the host has a burden in making sure they both talk. You can't have a silent guest because then the audience is saying, "What happened? Something wrong here? What's going on?"
Well, and you can't have one dominate the
That's
conversation,
true.
and that I've had to get a little, assertive,
Yeah,
with that.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think in that sense too, we like to have two guests on, but for me, in a way, I like the energy of having, sometimes the guests, or if we have one guest or two guests, they could be kind of nervous. So to me, it's this comfort knowing that I have like Matt there, he knows how it goes, and we kind of can both take on that role of like leading the conversation as well as having that role of kind of like nurturing the guest. So I like having that.
This
shared
shows that everybody
responsibility.
has his own style, right? All
Yeah.
the shows have a different kind of culture to them. I had an energy show last night, and it was a relatively contentious issue, but they were all trying to be
Nice.
non-contentious. So one guy presented, and when he was finished, I turned to the other guy and I said, "My old question, how much of that do you agree with?" And he said, "You're trying to set us up for contention." I said, no, whatever your answer is okay with me.
Didn't he just try that with you?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
So, Zuri Bender, how much of that do you agree with?
All of it.
Good answer.
No, I feel like you guys are giving a lot of great pointers, and you are pointing out something that is very important. At ThinkTech, our hosts aren't just hosts. You're also mini producers. You're going out, you're recruiting people, you're making the show work, you're working together. So what kind of advice do you have for people about networking in their everyday lives?
Absolutely. Well, let me go to one other question before we take the next break, and that is the question I suggested earlier, openings and introductions. This is also an art form, and I would suggest that everybody has his own style, but I'd like to hear your thoughts about it.
For the opening, I always like to, start off with like the logistics, the name of the show, and our time slot, trying to remember to think tech. But also, every episode I summarize what's kind of the purpose of the whole series. I think that sets it up for the guest and just kind of sets the tone again, just to let them know the theme of the show is just all about featuring them, again, just to make it a casual.
So you want to set the stage about the subject and what you intend to cover.
Yeah, and I guess it can be kind of redundant because I do it every show, but that's what I like
good.
to open with.
Some people do that. We have had a guest, a host by the name of Keith Bettinger, who wrote it out and he read it, on the teleprompter. He wanted to be sure that he
every week you read it off
yeah,
the teleprompter?
and he was good at it too. He could do teleprompter, and it was like really professional stuff because it sounds so good when you read it, if you read it right. What do you do, Reg?
Well, I think, very similar, but it's probably the only part of the show that has a quasi-scripted nature to it, because the tips that you have on the website kind of help me guide, through the opening remarks. But I go through that, I try to give credit where credit is due, and then I also try to summarize a little bit about what triggered the series and why I'm doing it, and what the intentions are. And then when I introduce a guest, I generally just use their names and the company. I don't try to get too much into that because I want them to share that and you know, put it in their own words.
Yeah, that was the old rule at Hawaii Public Radio too. Is you gotta introduce him early on. You can't spend too much time ramping up to that. And when you introduce him, you want to get him to talk back to you very quickly. You want his voice on the soundtrack as early as you can get it on.
And it's the best way to get them comfortable talking is what's your name and how did you get into business? What's your business? What does it do? And all of a sudden you've got a couple minutes of conversation there where they get comfortable talking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a big point about getting them comfortable. Zuri, what would you add to that?
You guys are covering most of the points already, so, you know, I don't have much to add to it at this point. I'll just keep listening.
Okay, well, in that case, why don't we do a break?
I love it.
We'll take a break right now. We'll be right back with Reg Baker, Justine Espiritu, and of course, Zuri Bender.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. Come join us every Friday at 2 p.m. when I interview interesting scientists about what they do, why they do it, and why we should all care about it. It's a lot of fun to see. We hear, and you can learn interesting stuff. You'll hear all kinds of fascinating science, and we know you'll have a great time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Stan the Energy Man, Stan Osterman, and I'm here to tell you about my show on Friday, every Friday, on my lunch hour, 12 o'clock till 1 o'clock here on Think Tech Hawaii. We talk about everything energy and anything you ever wanted to know about energy. So we're full of energy, and we'll see you here every Friday at noon to 1. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live. We're here with Reg Baker, Justine Espiritu, and our disembodied voice, Zuri Bender. And we're talking about, well, Think Tech Tectorial, thrills and chills, tips and tricks from Think Tech Hawaii for our shows, for the benefit of our hosts and for the public who should know how we put all the sausage together. Okay, well, difficult issue is breaks and returns. You know, because what we like to do is give people a rest every 15 minutes and therefore a break. It's not for a commercial, even though some people use that term. It's for promotion of other shows. So how do you approach that? How do you figure out, you know, how to get out and in a graceful way?
You know, I've got one eye on the guest and the other eye on the clock. And so I'm trying to watch the clock, and I'm careful that as we get approaching that 15-minute break time, that I don't ask a question that may get too involved.
Yeah.
So I try to structure it so that the question before a break is fairly short. If it gets to be a little long-winded, then I'll find an appropriate time to just jump in and say, you know what, I really love this part of the conversation. I really want to get back to it, but we got to take a quick break. Yeah. And so that usually works fairly well.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't look at the clock. For each of the different segments, kind of always feel different. I just try to be in the conversation and be present, so I'm never looking at the clock, and I just wait for Zuri to be
I noticed that. I was watching you today. You were so completely focused on your guest. I mean, it was so clear that you were listening. You were absorbing everything that he was saying. It was good. Yeah. And it urges people, you know, it motivates them to
I can really only have like a one-track mind, so I'm like, forget the clock. I'm just gonna kind of try to focus on the conversation. So then sometimes when like Zuri's in my ear and they're just kind of getting into something, I think my problem is I'll kind of let them go, even though Zuri's like, break. I'm like, wait a minute.
We gotta have that show.
Yeah, and then I'll kind of maybe sometimes I'll have to interrupt a little bit and then just kind of say, this is great, we're going to take a quick break, and then I'll try to go into the break with a little lingering of like, well, this is what we're going to get to when we come back.
The old cliffhanger thing.
Yeah.
Does Zuri ever give you like any jokes?
Oh yeah, it's the worst. It's the worst.
You think you're the only one?
I love my jokes. But just back to the little pointer about going in and out of breaks. I love that everyone has a different style. It definitely works for Justine to have a co-host because, you know, he's kind of watching the clock, so he knows that, okay, Zuri's pretty serious. It's time to go. It's the end of the day. Let's go. Reg is really great at watching the clock because he knows when he gets that final countdown, it's time to get ready for the next show, so close out. Yeah. So the way that you actually run your show does impact the entire flow of the day. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true.
But luckily, I'm the last show, so I'm just like, everyone just wants to hang out. And we're always like, we need more time.
Yeah. Well, Zuri is easy to work with on this. She's going to give you a little more time if you need it. And she's going to be listening for a break. And sometimes with me, she tells me, now, you got it. You found a place, go for it. And I do. But the cliffhanger thing is always useful because then you're holding them for the next segment. The truth is in media, people listen for only so long, and you want to try to hold them, and a break is a time when you could lose them. So you want to give them something to chew on and come back, or at least stay around. The other thing is I listen for opportunities for a joke. So somebody will say, I broke my leg. Ah, you broke your leg. What a great time for a break.
I'll try that. Just any random thing they say.
Really?
I started growing eggplant. Eggplant. What a great time
what a great time for a break. More?
I'll try that. We had an interesting opportunity to take a break at today's show because we had the German Google guy and we had the German Deutschland 808, which is a German food truck.
Yeah.
And have you ever watched Seinfeld?
Yeah, oh, sure.
They have the soup Nazi on.
I remember that.
There's two German guys, he said, you guys aren't the soup Nazi anyway.
Oh, you did that? That's wonderful.
So everybody laughed, but there was a good time for a break.
Perfect.
All right.
Well, okay, so now you've had your break. It's a minute, more or less. And you're coming back, and Zuri tells you have 3, 2, 1 seconds. Now you want to come back. And let me add, by the way, this is relevant to this discussion, is that we have added Think Tech Radio. You can get the audio track of all of our stuff 24/7 if you go to thinktechhawaii.com/radio. Now that means it's like real radio. And you can't count on lower third titles to identify the people at the table.
That's right.
And so it becomes all the more important to do the traditional thing of identifying your guests and yourself before and after the break. I'm throwing that in because I think that's a new development and it's worth discussing. But what do you customarily do on the return? How do you return?
When it's an abbreviated version of the introduction. I don't do all the housekeeping stuff, but I welcome back, to the show series name. I've got my guests here today, and I usually name them. Depending upon how long or how complicated the full name is, I might just use first names. But I'll always use the first name and sometimes the second, and then also the company name. And then I'll remind everybody where we left off, and I'll say, we were just getting into a conversation on this, and we're going to go ahead and
That's great style.
that.
That's great style. Justine?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we try to always start again with this is the show we're at, here's we're the co-hosts, here's our guests, and then definitely try to recap, do a good little summary of what we just talked about and what we were getting into, which is sometimes what we end up getting into is not always the cliffhanger I left them with. Especially if we do a tag team, I'll close before the break and then I'll be like, okay, Matt, you take over for opening, and then he takes it in a different direction. We're like, well, we'll just hopefully everyone forgot what I said we were going to talk about. But as long as there's a conversation going on, then hopefully.
But this goes to the question of the discussion during the break. Reg?
I was just going to say that what's happening in between the break or during the break is also important because that's when there may be some topics that popped up in the first section that I want to be able to come back with or maybe expand on or whatever, and so I'll coach them a little bit. Say, okay, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about this or this, and it creates a more comfortable feeling for them because they know, and now they can think for a few minutes or seconds on where they're going to go and what are they going to say. So it adds to the conversation.
Yeah.
And actually, that's where I have to come in and remind you guys sometimes. Don't let them answer because then they'll feel like they're repeating. They won't say it on air.
Yeah,
and we
good
missed
point.
some great stuff during the commercials.
Yeah.
So.
Well, which brings up another good point. I mean, you mentioned you take them out to lunch and have a conversation. I kind of don't like to hang out with them before the show at all. I give them a brief, here's some topics, here's maybe a question. I like to give that to them so they're just comfortable knowing that we have plenty to talk about when they do come on the show, but I don't like to hang out beforehand. We do like to meet up 30 minutes before the show just to
make sure they're here on time, but then we'll actually start to have a conversation and we'll be like, stop talking about it, like, don't ruin it, save it for the
Makes it
show,
more
like, don't call me.
impromptu.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like definitely a fine line of like how much you set up what the conversation is going to be, and then how like detailed you get into it. Because I'm definitely, so they'll come 30 minutes early, and sometimes we'll be like, okay, actually we're not going to talk to each other. I'm just glad you're here early, and let's just sit in silence in the studio.
Both of those things work. I mean, having lunch, ramping right up to it with in a content discussion, or holding back and no spilling. That's my term for talking about it. And then you worry about whether you said it before, and you're all confused about what to say on the air. But I think you do achieve a spontaneity by not, it reminds me of that movie about the Marine sergeant, and he never, drank with the men. He wanted to remain distant. He wanted their greatest effort. And so he didn't talk to them at all. He was just mean. And that way he got better performance from them. It's the same thing in terms of spontaneity if you don't talk to them. So there's a benefit either way. Now there's a middle ground, I'll tell you, a middle ground. And that is you have lunch, if that's what you want to do with them, a couple of days before.
A couple of days.
Then you don't run into the spilling problem,
One of the Machiavellian reasons that I like having a lunch before the show is because if they don't show up, I've got time to, I guess, look at my options.
Yeah.
If they don't show up to the lunch?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then you know they're not coming.
Exactly.
Well, I thought that was, it's also an interesting way to like hook them in.
It is.
Yeah.
Who gives up, a free lunch?
Yeah.
So there's a couple reasons underlining why I do that.
I always found that the meeting before was beneficial in one way. It educated you as a host about so many things you might not know about. So your questions could be so much more sophisticated, and you'd be talking on, their level of science. This was especially the case if they were expert at something, so that you could dive right into the most complex material, and the audience would say, whoa, how does he know about this?
Yeah.
You might consider that if you're dealing with an expert, because, the expert will help you get educated.
Actually, it's funny. Sometimes the experts come in and they're looking at you like, how did you know that? Like, you seem like you're well versed on everything, Jay.
Yeah, well, that's why I try to lay out, because I'll have a reason of why I reached out to them. And if I'm not necessarily 100% sure what their deal is or what their experience is, that's why I like to lay out, well, here's the questions and interests I have, and I send it over to them. I'm like, please feel free if there's something else you want to talk about, if there's something recent going on. Like, I tried to give them the opportunity to do their own direction. You have to balance of, hey, here's some structure I'm going to give you, but I want them to feel, if there's something particular they want to talk about. But to me, sometimes it's hard to get someone engaged to help structure that. They agree to be on the show, and then they just want to show up. So sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, the worst thing is when they want to give you their shtick, their spiel, and no matter what you say, you're going to get the canned version. And you got to get off balance on that. You actually have to ask them questions that they don't expect.
Well, that's why I feel like the folks that we have on our show, like I said, this isn't really their normal. They're not really used to being interviewed, so they don't really have this shtick I'm trying to break or anything.
Yeah.
I just need to ask a personal question. Where'd you go to high school?
Right.
Or where'd you go to college, or what was your major, or something that's totally unrelated, and it kind of breaks that canned response.
Yeah. I want to talk about the curiosity. Curiosity, it should guide you. And your curiosity, if you get in touch with your curiosity, what you're really doing is representing the audience. You are the agent of the audience. You are trying to find in your mind what the audience might be curious about. And so you represent them, you ask their questions, okay? The other thing I've always thought about is the sausage theory. We talk about making sausage here, the show. Well, the sausage theory is the question begets the answer, and the answer begets the next question. And to me, it's like spelunking in a cave. You follow the trail of that rope in the cave, and then you follow it back. And so if the audience hears that you're on this kind of curiosity, logical track, and coming back on it, and remembering the icons of the 45 minutes, they will say, this is good. This is intellectually integrated.
Jay, the curiosity point that you made, it helps me a lot. I taught at HBU and University of Hawaii for 15 years, as an adjunct professor. And I worked with a lot of students, and I actually have a lot of students watching the show, and they look at it as a case study of doing business. It complements some of the coursework that they do. And so I ask the questions that generally I would think the students would want to hear the answers to. And so I go, well, you had a challenge. How did you overcome that? And so they get into it. And so I'm taking the perspective in some cases of the audience, trying to ask those relevant questions.
Yeah, and one more point before we ask Zuri for her input on this, is that sometimes you can ask, you got to do it delicately, very personal questions. Like, not only high school, but, what are your thoughts on this important issue where you wouldn't necessarily share it? And the guy can say, no, I'm not going to discuss that. It's okay. But he can also say yes. And then you get a gem. You get a kind of scoop. You get his personal thoughts. You get the kind of candor that we love to see, that nobody else can get. And that's really great. So it's okay to ask a question, that where you're personally curious. It may not be a question that the regular media would ask, but hey, why not?
What if you get a really strange answer?
You could.
I have. And you just gotta move on.
I think that just reminded me of a moment I had where I asked just someone like, what kind of motivates you? And then what they said was like, I wasn't expecting that. Let's just take a moment and appreciate that. And
yeah, it's good though. It's good. That's the kind of
yeah.
engagement. Yeah. Zuri, what would you add?
Sometimes those awkward comments are the perfect time to take an unexpected break.
True, that's true.
But on the other hand, I love when people come in there super nervous and you just have a way of opening them up and they leave saying, wow, I can't believe I said that on camera.
Yeah.
So whenever you can get people to be super honest and go beyond their initial, packaged response, that's always the best thing for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's an important point for all of us.
What do we think for our last 2 minutes, Jay?
Yeah, exactly. The last 2 minutes is about closing, okay? So now you're running out of gas, just as we are here now. Ask me how I know. How do you formulate those last few words?
When it's like Zuri says we have 1 minute left, I just start with thanking them for coming on and just kind of reiterating why it was so great to feature them and thank them for doing the work that they do and just sharing their perspective. So that's what I try to focus the closing on.
Yeah. Okay.
That's always the last 2 or 3 minutes of the show is always the most difficult for me because I've got the one eye on the clock. I know it's coming. I know I don't want to ask any questions that's going to go over, but I want to leave a little bit of time for the closing, my closing remarks. And so I have to really phrase it carefully and get them engaged. And sometimes I have to nudge them with my leg, and that's our preset signal that you got to wrap up.
Yeah. Zuri?
I think everybody has a different way of closing out, and it's always great when you close out on time.
Yeah, we're going to do that now. Okay, we're out of time. This has been a great discussion about tips and tricks and thrills and chills about being host on a Think Tech show with Reg Baker and Justina Espiritu and our remote control disembodied Zuri Bender. It's been great having you guys, and I hope we can do it again soon. Aloha.
And before we leave, make sure to tweet us at ThinkTechHI if you have any questions. We'll make sure to do it in our follow-up.
Yeah, and you can watch this show on YouTube, too. Whatnot.